the good goodies that Lucy has prepared. And there you go. Okay, moving right along, Shelley.
Yes. Okay, I have a first draft of our list of book selections for next year. And I say first draft because you'll see there are a few blanks that I'm just waiting to hear back from some people. I'll just start this and we can pass it around. And I will say, I did not know when Grace a few years ago asked me to help select. This job has a lot of pressure. You all are such good readers and you're a very discerning group of readers, and not just any book will do. And so I enjoy looking and discovering and reading lots of books to come up with this list. And you know, there are books that that are on the bestseller list, or books that we hear a lot about in the news or magazine articles or something. But it's finding those books that we don't hear a lot about, that maybe don't get the attention, that sometimes are the best reads. And so I've come up with this list, and thank you to several who have made these recommendations. In September, we're reading The German Wife, which Grace recommended, and it is a post-World War II book. In October, Walt recommended The Conclave, which has an intrigue and a little mystery with it, so thank you. In November is Sipsworth, which I found, and then I had Becca read, and I think you'll become very fond of the main character in that book. In December is The Best Christmas Pageant Ever, which is an oldie, but is such a wonderful Christmas message. In January is The Girl Who Smiled Beads. And this is a really interesting story that I have read, and it is a little rough in parts, but it's written by a woman who, as a young girl at age 6, was a refugee from Rwanda, but she ended up miraculously being brought to the United States, and she graduated from Yale. And it's a really good story. I think for those of us who are involved in missions or who support missions at this church, this is a viewpoint from the person who we might mission to, in just the very dire circumstances this young child found herself in. So I think you'll find that I enjoyed it. So I hope you will too. Several of you recommended The Women by Kristen Hanna. So that will be read in February. And I'm looking for a reviewer who might currently be in the military, in the medical field, or maybe previously served in the medical field, in the military, specifically in Vietnam, that might be a good person to review that. So that's why that reviewer is blank. I'm still looking for that. So any suggestions, please let me know. In March, Jane Hansen would like to review The Librarian of St. Malo, and that's a book she has enjoyed. In April, Gates suggested The Cat Who Saved Books, and he will be the reviewer. And that is a great satire, commentary on the state of reading and publishing in our society today. So I think you'll find that very interesting. And then I'm still searching for the May book. So I will hopefully have a final list in May that will be complete. But this will get you started. So I hope you enjoy your reading.
Thank you very much. I can tell you for 9 books for the year, she reads at least 3 times that number. To get, am I not right, Shelley?
Well, maybe not 3 times.
I think 3.
I learned I need to read it first, so just not any recommendation will do.
Well, we appreciate it, and I look forward to get started reading some different books. That will be good. Thank you so much. Does anybody else have anything else to bring up before I get into the introduction of our speaker? I'll tell you this before I introduce Debbie Taylor. If I said everything that I could say, it would be the whole program, and we would not have a book review. We really appreciate you being here with us, Debbie, and learning about your passion and where your heart is. Debbie is a third generation Japanese American. She grew up in the suburbs of Detroit, so one more connection there. I love it. And she had a significant life change as a senior in high school when she surrendered her life to Jesus Christ. And the rest of anything I tell you about it will reflect that commitment she made at that time. She went on to receive her Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Michigan, majoring in psychology and minoring in dance performance. She worked for the U of M's chief psychologist before leaving to work as assistant to the head of an international ecumenical Christian community headquartered in Ann Arbor. She used her dance training to teach, choreograph, and to perform with an evangelical Christian performing arts company while in college and for 5 years after. That's what I call making good use of your gifts to serve. From there on, I think she's probably going to touch on some of this herself, but her passion, and I think Rick also I can include in this, have very much been woven with China into every part of their life. They have 4 children, and one daughter was born and adopted by them in China. She's worked with Christian students as part of the Christian Asian Outreach Program. They've had a mission trip to China, and they're very much in support of First Pres Chinese missionary, who is here, I believe, for a year before he returns. So we may hear more about that. I'm not going to take up, like I say, I could tell you more, but I'm going to stop now because we want to hear what she has to say and tie this all into the book. Thank you.
Thank you, Grace. And thank you for allowing me to present my review of Safely Home by Randy Alcorn. What I want to do is just kind of give an overview of the book and then highlight some of the topics and issues that the book brings up and maybe do some discussion if we have time. I wanted to let you know that I am not a public speaker and I haven't had a lot like my husband and probably many of you who have done many presentations and lectures. So I hope you will give me some grace as I read my review to you. So the book Safely Home was written in 2001 by Randy Alcorn, pastor and founder director of Eternal Perspectives Ministries, which is a nonprofit devoted to promoting an eternal viewpoint, drawing attention to people in special need of advocacy and help. He is author of more than 25 best-selling books, including The Treasure Principle, Heaven, and Heaven for Kids. This book, Safely Home, won the 2002 Evangelical Christian Publishers Association Book Award, with all proceeds going directly to a persecuted church depicted in the novel. Safely Home is an account of the persecution of Christians in China. It is sobering and a sad story, a fictional account, but based on real experiences of real people. The author states, many things in this book have actually happened in one way or another. I have attempted to keep it authentic and true to life in as many details as possible. Nearly all my characters are fictitious. Some are composites of several real people. Whenever I was thinking of someone in particular, I changed his name and life details so it would be impossible to identify him. The beautiful work of art by Ron DiGianni's painting Safety Home, which we'll show later on, under the book jacket, served as inspiration for the story. So, in the story, it begins with two main characters, Ben Fielding, a high-ranking American businessman, and Li Chuan, a Chinese Christian. They were Harvard roommates for 20 years prior. As a student, Ben was a Christian and had invited Chuan to church, where he too became a Christian. From there, Ben went the corporate route, climbing the ladder of success, while Chuan returned to China to become a professor, teacher, and author. Their stories separate for the first two chapters until Ben Fielding, who is fluent in Mandarin, is sent to China by his company, Guess International, a multinational corporation. Ben is sent to live with and work with typical Chinese citizens who may someday buy their product and work for Guess's China factories. Manufacturing semiconductors and microchips, owner and boss Martin Getz describes it as capitalists and communists scratching each other's backs. Boss Martin Getz wants Ben to stay with his old college roommate for 6 weeks to do market research and to get into the minds of typical Chinese people. And Ben reluctantly agrees. Upon arrival at Li Chuan's home, Ben is shocked. The house is sparse, tiny, and run down. And they have very Spartan living conditions. There is, however, a nice chair in the corner of the room, although no one seems to sit in it. Chuan lives in squalor in a run-down neighborhood with his wife Ning and young son Li Shen. Surely a renowned university professor and author would live in a larger, well-appointed house. But Ben finds later that Chuan is not a professor nor author as he planned to be, but a lowly assistant locksmith, but the best locksmith in town. Even the government officials came to Chuan for their locks and keys. Chuan was a top student at Harvard and had excellent credentials, but he was kept from his dream and assigned menial work by the Chinese government, which he performed with utmost excellency. Chuan lived by the yellowed paper from his days at Harvard that he had tacked to his shop's wall. A quote by Dr. Martin Luther King. If a man is called to be a street sweeper, he should sweep streets, even as Michelangelo painted, as Beethoven composed music, or as Shakespeare composed poetry. He should sweep streets so well that all the hosts of heaven and earth will pause to say, here lived a great street sweeper who did his job well. Well, China has several government-run communist churches where any Chinese citizen is free to attend. They are monitored, however, with the church services run by government-approved teachers, monitored by government officials and spies who use heavily edited Bibles which are approved and supplied by the government. In China, Mao is God, and all citizens must worship him only and live by his red book. Government churches must submit to restrictions that many Chinese Christians cannot accept. In some cities, 80% of Christians meet in house churches or underground church, a huge and growing church that secretly meets together. In these secret house church meetings, people take great risks to gather with each other, with other believers for worship. These non-government authorized meetings take place quietly, secretly, and held in the dark of night. Locations are changed from week to week, and word of upcoming meetings is carefully spread by word of mouth. The house church meetings center around the reading and teaching of the Bible, which they call the Shinju, their most precious possession, and the quiet singing of hymns of worship. Some house churches have a Bible or two, or some have a few handwritten pages of the Bible, which they read from. Other churches have none. Ming had a very precious handwritten Bible that her mother had passed down to her, each precious page lovingly copied and sewn together. The Communist Party insists it alone is a people's savior and instilled a government ban on speaking of Jesus, Jesus, of his resurrection and his return. The Three South Patriotic Movement, or Chinese Christian Council, has authority to approve all pastors and can take over any congregation, adding or removing pastors at will. If house church Christians are discovered and arrested, there are huge penalties to pay. They can be arrested on false charges, heavily fined, their good jobs taken from them, have severe education and travel restrictions, endure beatings, torture, prison, and even death. Life is made very difficult for their families. The gospel is seen in the new China as the problem, whereas the underground Christians, now twice the size of those Communist Party members, know it is the real solution. The true believers in the underground church have counted the cost and surrendered all for the sake of Yesu Jidu, Jesus Christ. Some say there are 5,000 to 10,000 new Christians in China every day, and there are never enough Bibles. Men and women bike or walk sometimes 80 miles, traveling for 5 days just to get to church and worship. Watchman Nee was a Chinese pastor who's written a number of books, all of which are excellent. But he wrote the book, The Normal Christian Life, probably his most well-known. And he instructed the house churches how to live by faith under persecution. He preached a powerful silent sermon one day when he suspected that the room of worshipers had been infiltrated with some spies. So what he did is he had a glass, and there was like a tile floor, and he threw the glass on the floor until it broke, and then he began walking over it, back and forth in every which way, different directions, and the glass kind of spread and spread and spread. The silent sermon spoke loudly to the house church, Christians, demonstrating that in attempting to destroy the church, the government had actually spread it. The church is growing and multiplying under communism. The state that persecutes the church is an instrument of God's hand to somehow make the church grow. Hudson Taylor is another was a pastor and another great evangelist in China and founder of the China Inland Mission. He led Chuan's great-grandfather, Li Manchu, to Christ. Li Manchu was the first Christian in the Li family, setting the precedent of a life of faith and obedience for the Li family line to follow. Safety Home addresses the 1,500-mile-long Great Wall of China, seen as China's proud and great accomplishment, but also seen by those affected by its construction as a 1,500-mile-long tombstone marking graves of tens of thousands of Christian peasants who died under forced labor, carrying out arrogant visions of corrupt men. Tiananmen Square is also mentioned, and they refer to it as 6/4, the 6th month on the 4th day in 1989, and this defines China's modern history. Ming's niece was killed there, and her body was not found until 3 weeks later by another student. The party first said that there were none killed, but retracted, saying a few dozen might have been killed, and it's unknown what they admit to now, but there were at least hundreds, if not thousands, killed at Tiananmen Square. China desires the world to see only the best side of their country and attempts to hide the rest. When Rick and I traveled to China in 1999, our photos were taken upon deplaning at the airport. There was and continues to be constant surveillance with cameras at every point, every street corner, every building. Phones are tapped. The sick, maimed, and the poorest are hidden away and neglected. An example of phone tapping, our oldest daughter went to Wheaton College, and she had a Dutch friend who grew up in China. Jan's family of 7 were missionaries to China. And he tells the story of a phone conversation he had while in China with a Dutch friend that quite shocked him. So he was talking to his friend who lived in Holland, and they were speaking Dutch. And of course, they're old friends, and they start laughing and getting faster and faster. And in the middle of the conversation, he hears a voice that says, "Please slow down. We cannot understand you." And so they say goodbye and hung up. He knew it was tapped, but that was kind of a surprise to him. And on our first trip to China in 1999, we were only given opportunity to see the most beautiful parks, the modern shops, successful business people, and nicest parts of the city. We were taken to tour a modern school full of cute, costumed children who sang and danced for us foreigners. This elite school consisted entirely of children of Communist Party members, and it was certainly not your typical Chinese school. So our experience adopting our youngest child, when we arrived at the orphanage where Marley stayed, we got a cheerful welcome from the staff. They all lined up outside to greet us at the main entrance. We were led to an impressive room where we were served fruit and water and waited for the babies to be brought to us. We were not allowed, however, to go through any other hallways or rooms or to see the babies' living quarters. Many of the babies, we found out later, were dirty, ill, sporting rashes and sores, and shared a crib with 2 or 3 other babies. Most of the adoptive babies were undernourished, sickly, and unable to walk at age 2. But they were squeaky clean and had the cutest outfits on when they came to meet us. Marley was the youngest, rosy-cheeked and somewhat even plump. She came strutting out holding her nanny's little pinky finger, which brought me great delight because God had answered our prayers for people and angels to care for her while we couldn't be with her. On the elevator down, an elderly, bruised, and crippled woman tried to get on with us, but she was stopped short by a worker who scolded her and pulled her away from us. We were not supposed to see her. Back to the story. High above the earth, angels and a cloud of witnesses, including Chuan's martyred father, grandfather, and great-grandfather, and great-grandmother, watched through a portal. The watcher, who stood and spoke, and the reader, who sat and wrote, recorded all he saw in the large tomb, observing all of Earth's contents with keen eyes. They always focused on one specific thing: an individual, a family, a church, not the masses. And not a thing went unnoticed. Back on Earth, the Lee family home was being stormed by 3 government officials with rifles. The soldiers violently upended furniture, tore up floorboards, and found the hidden gunny sack of 3 Bibles, which had been carefully hidden under the loose floorboard. These precious Bibles were supposed to be given to house churches. Chuan is seized and thrown in the Logai prison system, an evil, dark, and putrid place where horrible screams, moans, and sounds of beatings filled the air. Chuan himself was severely beaten before being thrown into a solitary cell in the basement. The prison system was also a source of slave labor for the political and religious dissidents in order to punish and reform them. Prisoners, including Chuan, were sent to work at the factories without compensation and with very little food. Yes International was one of these factories. Ben Fielding's time in China was up, but he extends his stay in China to try to help Chuan and his family. Eventually, he discovers that Yes International is part owner of the Chinese factory where Chuan is forced to work. Ben is ordered by his boss not to do anything to upset the partnership with the Chinese. So he finds a way to visit Chuan weekly outside of the prison building by paying the guards a hefty bribe. With each visit, Tron appears weaker, somehow smaller and more battered, but also, surprisingly, more joy-filled. They have many talks about Yesu and what is happening in the house church and in the prison cells. A kindly prison guard who Chuan introduced to Yesu found a chair for Chuan and put it in his cell. Now he had somewhere to sit instead of sitting on the hard, cold, dirty floor. The guard was quite puzzled that Chuan never sat on the chair, but instead he kneeled by it on the hard floor and talked to the chair. He told Ben that he found a wonderful job at the prison, volunteering to clean the dank, filthy, rat-infested and excrement-filled floors of each cell, thus allowing him freedom to visit each prisoner, having fellowship, sharing the gospel, and washing their feet and binding up their wounds. He brings the love of Yesu to each prisoner. The prisoners are encouraged and comforted as Chuan speaks to them, loving and serving them while writing scripture verses on the walls with his bar of soap. Ben finds his goals are changing as he leaves his job in order to focus on getting his friend out of prison and helping Chuan's wife and son, Ning and Li Shen. He does all he can to help Chuan get Chuan released, even taking on the local government. Along the way, Ben recommits his life to Christ when he is asked on the spot to teach the Bible at the house church service one evening. As he begins to read the scriptures aloud to the small congregation, something in his heart changes, and he ends up surrendering himself to Yesu. Those at the service were so hungry for God's word that they didn't want Ben to stop reading, and the service went on until finally it ended at 3 a.m. when Ben just could no longer go on. But very early the next morning, they woke him eagerly expecting their new teacher to continue teaching right where he left off the night before, and he did. So the results of spiritual warfare in China are played out far differently than in the United States. In China, regular human men, but with a superhuman power behind them, institute things such as forced abortions and sterilizations, the killing of babies at birth, imprisonments, and the torture and murder of Christian believers. Chuan's wife, Ming, grieved her own lost baby through a government-forced abortion, followed by mandatory sterilization. Li Shen would be her only child. In his cell, at one point, Chuan begins to despair as he recognizes Mowgli, or Satan, at work all around him through the evilness of men. Upon seeing some of this evil manifested around him, Ben was taken aback. He had never seen this kind of spiritual warfare in the United States. Chuan replied, "In the U.S., perhaps the affluence, comfort, and freedom make you forget that you are at war." Praying to Yesu in his prison cell, Chuan is killed by the butt of the evil guard's gun. Doctors immediately complained that the body was left too long to use the liver, kidney, lungs, and heart for transplant patients in exchange for their yuan. Chuan is ushered through the great portal where he meets his martyred ancestors who are cheering him on from above. He looks through the great portal to earth and sees Ming crying as Shen hand copies pages from Ming's mother's Bible. Will Shen carry on the Li family legacy? Perhaps he'll be the last martyr. So this is the picture that Ron DiGianni drew, and Randy Alcorn was inspired by to write this story. From Hebrews 12:1-2. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. So that's my review. But the story brings up many issues, and I just wanted to list some of them, and I don't know if anyone wants to comment. Please feel free, if you have anything you'd like to say. So the story raises important issues and topics to think about and possibly discuss, including 1, human rights issues and China's inhumane treatment of its citizens. 2, forced slave labor of prisoners in China. And what responsibility does the United States and other countries have who employ these laborers knowing they are mistreated and uncompensated? 3, the sale of bodies and internal organs of some deceased prisoners in exchange for large sums of money. The Whitney Museum here in San Antonio had an exhibit on the human body a few years back. Rick and I went, not realizing what we were going to see. Real human bodies with their faces were on display. These bodies were real deceased Chinese prisoners, exhibited for our knowledge and amusement in the name of science and art. 4, forced sterilizations and abortions were common as a result of China's one-child policy, which was instituted in 1979 to curb the population growth. In 1984, a second child was allowed for some families in rural areas and for couples where both parents were only children. Chinese families traditionally looked to male children to further the family name and to care for their parents in old age. So many baby girls were aborted or abandoned as infants in hopes of having sons. China announced the end of the one-child policy in 2015, and the two-child policy became effective, allowing all couples to have 2 children now. Due to this policy, however, China faces a growing elderly population and many, many young men and much fewer young women. In 1998, we heard that thousands of baby girls were being abandoned every day because of the one-child policy. Mothers were desperate, desiring a son to carry on the family name and to support them in their old age. So daughters were discarded, left on roadsides to die, and were killed at birth. God put it in our hearts in an unmistakable way that He had a little girl in China waiting for us to come and bring her home. 13-month-old Xia Shiyi, now Marley Grace, joined our family in 1999. The main selling point of Safely Home is that it peers behind the curtain into the oppression of Christians in a country that does everything it can to cover it up. The 10th anniversary edition of Safely Home begins with an additional foreword that responds to some of the criticism that Alcorn had had since it was first published from the author. Many readers ask me whether Christians in China continue to suffer persecution. Often they've been told it's a thing of the past. This book has been written in order to counter that perception, peddled by the Chinese government to serve its foreign relations aims, and it does so very well. Although the plot, characters, and immediate setting are fictional, the story is no less real. Thank you. And Rick now has some experience that he would like to share with us.
So, Debbie had asked me to help with this a little bit, so not trying to steal her thunder or anything, but sort of separately from third review, I thought it'd be helpful to tell you a little bit about our experiences with China, but also, and then why it seems really important to us, and also a little bit of an update on what actually is going on in China these days in terms of religion. So this is, we traveled to China twice. We traveled in 1999 when we adopted our daughter. And on that trip, we spent about little over 2 weeks in China. Um, Deb thought that they kept us there so that we would spend more money, which might be true. I don't know. They kept taking us to nice tourist places and stuff, but it was also to go through the process of doing the adoption. And we went back in 2018 for two reasons. Um, uh, the main reason we went was we went as part of this group that put on what they call a Sunshine Camp, which was a camp for Chinese college students. And this was actually supported by the Chinese government because they had a history of doing this, and they taught them like servant leadership, and so it was viewed as an okay thing because they taught the students leadership skills. The other reason, though, that this organization sponsored this was it's as a form of evangelism. We were very specifically instructed not to push evangelism, but to answer people's questions as we talk about it. And that was okay as long as we were like really strongly evangelizing. This just happens to be, the way it worked is Deb and her daughter and me and I, we each had small groups that we like small group leaders, and this is just the group that I was working with. But, it was an interesting experience in that these kids clearly there was a lot of loneliness and there was a lot of guilt. Like there was a time where people could just share, like, you know, like what's going on in your mind, or sort of, it was supposed to be sort of like just sharing your life. But well, a lot of these kids had guilt for like their grandparent died and they hadn't visited them for a few months. Another guy shared that one of his friends had committed suicide and he hadn't been able to prevent him from committing suicide. And it just seemed like they really needed Jesus. Their society, to us, was clearly a godless society, for the most part, except for the underground churches. And they just needed Jesus. And so for me, it was a very rewarding experience. So this is Deb and her daughter Margie in 2018 in Hong Kong. The other reason we went to China in 2018 was that the Sunshine Camp was actually in Hong Kong, but then we also traveled to mainland China to visit Marty's orphanage, where we adopted her from 20 years before. And this is in the room that we first met Marty in 1999, and it looked exactly like that in 1999. So this is us visiting that after all those years. And this is the first time we saw Marty. Like literally, we were sitting at the table and they brought her in, and that's when we first met her. So that's the first we've seen her, and then that's her in 2018. One of the things I wanted to say about this picture, though, is Debbie really likes to pray. I mean, she really believes in prayer, and she likes to pray for very specific things. And in the months leading up to us going to China the first time, she wanted us to specifically pray that God would give Marley some really caring nannies that would care for her and take care of her and love her. And when we went there the first time and met with, there were like 5 or 6 other families too that went to the orphanage. And most of the babies were really malnourished and clearly in need of loving care. When they brought Marley in, they literally said, "Oh, this is our favorite." And then they explained to us that she would somehow get them up in the middle of the night to take her to the kitchen to get a snack and to eat. And so she was not angry, she was actually a little on the pump side. And we were just very very gratified that, God had answered that very, very specifically. The other thing about this trip that I want to mention is this gentleman over here, his name, Juan Hui, he goes by Isaac, and he had gone through this sunshine camp a couple years before he became a Christian, and then lives in Shenzhen, China, and he came to visit the sunshine camp when we were in Hong Kong, and we got to know him, and he helped us do shopping at some of these street side bazaars, and he would help us sticker and get the best possible price for things, and then afterward I kept in really pretty close contact for 3 or 4 years. We would text back and forth and sometimes have phone conversations. And, what I wanted to focus on about that was he's a Christian and he has a church in Shenzhen, and he would send me pictures of it. I was a little bit hesitant to actually show pictures of his church, but he posted them all over his Facebook, and he would send these pictures to me. And we'd have these discussions is this safe? Can you really be this open with your Christianity? And it was interesting because he felt like it was. He said, "No, our church is an approved church, and it's okay." However, at some point he shared that the pastor of his church got in trouble with the authorities because his children were going to church or going to school that taught the Christian values, and you're not allowed to do that. And so he had to pull his children out of that school, and their pastor was actually from Indonesia, and for a while it looked like he was going to need to leave the country because of the oversight of Chinese authorities. So it was an interesting perspective. But one thing about Isaac's church is it's in Shenzhen, which is a very, very modern Chinese city. It's what they call back in the 1970s a special economic zone, which was created at the time that China opened up to the West as a city where there could be a lot of Western investment and development of businesses and whatnot. So his experience, I think, is in a city that has really got a lot of connections with the rest of the world, and is probably much more cosmopolitan than most of China. So a little bit about where are things today in terms of religion in China. So per the Chinese Constitution, there's 5 religions that are supposed to be okay: Buddhism, Catholicism, Taoism, Islam, and Protestantism. However, they define Christianity and Islam as being foreign religions. And so they've much more focused on those 2 religions in terms of wanting to make them more like Chinese. And so I'll come back to that in a minute, but the other thing about that was, even though those religions are technically okay, they have to be approved by the government, and they have to be registered, and they're really not as free as it might sound. So China went through this thing called the Cultural Revolution from about 1966 to 1976, which was sort of a re-emphasis on communist principles and on making society better from a Chinese Communist standpoint. And during that time, religion was very severely repressed. And basically no religion was really acceptable. Then in the 1980s and the 1990s, there was some increasing tolerance, and it was sort of a situation where if you didn't rile the government, if you didn't actively resist or actively speak out about the government, then I think a lot of Christians were not hassled too much. But then in the last decade or two, there's been increasing repression actually. So Xi Jinping, who's the current leader of China, he's got a number of different titles, but one of them is president, and he's also head of the Communist Party. He called for Sinicizing the Christianity back in 2015, and that means making it more like China. And so the decorations in churches were supposed to be more traditional Chinese things. There was one church that was told that on the picture of Jesus, they had put a picture of President Xi next to it. And they were somehow able to get out of that by arguing that people would confuse the picture of President Xi with the other thief who died on the cross with Jesus. And so you wouldn't want that. So they didn't have to put his picture up in that particular church. But that's the type of stuff. In this last decade or so, the Roman Catholic Church has pretty much lost all its right to appoint cardinals and bishops. Public displays of Christian symbols are no longer allowed, so a lot of churches all across the country had to take down steeples and crosses and things like that, so that the building would not have Christian symbols. One of the really sticky issues is claiming lordship of Jesus Christ, because that's authority that would be higher than the country. And so they really tried to crack down on that. Some other things that are going on is Christians have been persecuted. Muslims have been very badly persecuted in the northwestern part of the country. The Uyghurs, there's estimated to be up to about 1 million Uyghurs that have been relocated in these concentration camps to be re-educated. But that seems to involve very cheap labor and a lot of control of thoughts and trying to bring them back to the communist way of looking at life. A lot of churches are required to have cameras, and the cameras are equipped with facial recognition so that they can keep track of people and make sure that nothing inappropriate is happening in the churches. It's illegal to evangelize or teach children about Christianity. And some churches have been forced to use the official Chinese Bible. And an example of some of the ways this Chinese Bible was altered is when Jesus encounters the woman that's caught in adultery. In the Chinese Bible, after the other men leave, because Jesus says, whoever's guilt-free to cast the first stone, then Jesus stones the woman and kills her.
Oh, no.
Because if sinless men couldn't punish wrong, then the law would collapse. And so that is a rather remarkable alteration of the Bible. There is some uncertainty of how many Christians are in China. I read probably 10 different sources and got very widely varying numbers. And I think that's because we really don't know. Because surveys of Chinese people, because they are persecuted, they're probably not being totally forthcoming. But there seems to be pretty good agreement that the church has been growing quickly in recent years. And that persecution in many ways has helped Christianity thrive. I just wanted to list a few references that I have used to sort of support some of the thoughts that I've been mentioning. But I also thought that it would be helpful to I'm going to play a short clip from the Wall Street Journal, which is a podcast about the repression in China.
Our editorial page publishes a column every week called Houses of Worship, in which we examine trends in religion around the world. And this week's column was especially poignant, so we decided to invite the author, Jillian Melcher, a National Review writer and a fellow at the Steamboat Institute, to talk about this column called China's New Crackdown on Christians. And Jillian, your piece described this broad-based repression of faith in mainland China. Why is the regime doing that, and why are they doing it now?
Well, I think it's intimidated by religion. There's been, since the Maoist days, this idea that you can't have Christianity and have the Chinese Communist government. But the irony is, every time they crack down on Christianity, it grows. People choose God over government anytime. And that's unfortunate because really, you can have both.
Yeah, you can have both. Now is the other remarkable thing about your story. Pastor Gu, he's a Protestant pastor who was the center of your narrative. You described him as someone who wasn't against the government in Beijing, who actually wanted to cooperate with it. So why would they find him threatening?
Well, he's a remarkable figure because he's actually the pastor of the largest mega church in China, probably the largest Mandarin-speaking church on the planet. And he ended up, he built his career within the state-sanctioned system. He's part of Free Self-Patriotic Movement. He's part of China Christian Council.
So Christianity is allowed so long as it's an official religion of the state?
Yes, under Deng Xiaoping, we switched the policy in China. So now you can have Christianity, but the state tries to manage it through this bureaucracy. And their idea is that they're going to manage it into decline. The exact opposite has happened. You've seen just booming Christianity, and there's no sign that that trend is going to stop. Pastor Gu is a guy who worked within that system until the Chinese government grew so repressive, tearing down churches, demolishing crosses, that he felt he needed to speak out. And now he's been disappeared. He's in one of the black jails, notorious for torture, notorious for all kinds of human rights abuses. And I think this is really a tipping point because if he can't stay on the right side of the authorities, on the right side of the law, who can?
Yeah, it's a great question. Pope Francis came out this week, he had an interview in the Asia Times where he praised the communist regime to the skies, and yet he said nothing about this trend that you've described. What was your reaction to that?
I was pretty shocked by it, to be honest. So what I wrote about was in Zhejiang province. When I was there, I visited the Catholic Church in Zhejiang province, and one of the things that they really cared about was that the previous pope had come up with a World Day of Prayer for the church in China. Sitting in those pews, seeing how much that meant to them, that they were remembered, that their troubles were remembered, that their persecution was remembered, was incredibly moving. I would think that it was pretty demoralizing to them that that did not get mentioned.
Now, we have an editorial also in this morning's paper. It's up on WSJ.com titled China's Overseas Abductions, which talks about the efforts of Beijing to round up dissidents even when they're not in mainland China. So, Julia, is Pastor Gu also part of a broader crackdown on rights in the mainland?
Absolutely. I think you've seen this intensifying not just with Christians, not just with religious practitioners. You've seen it with human rights lawyers. Basically, anyone who speaks out or is in any way critical of the Chinese government. I think he's very much a flashback to Maoist policies that we haven't seen in decades.
A flashback to Maoist policies. I'm sorry that we're out of time. We'll have to have you back soon to talk about how you do all this reporting on the mainland.
Thank you.
Jillian Melcher, thanks very much.
So that was about a year ago. So it's fairly current. So do you want to take questions?
You can take questions or discussion or comments, anything.
Oops. Sorry about that.
It was a very moving book. It stuck with me for quite some time.
Yes.
And, I just remember the first part when he arrives in China and expecting his old college roommate to be this great professor and author, and sort of shock after shock of a different type of
I truly would have turned it off. I'm sorry.
That was, I think that's how we as Americans probably look at China, just not aware of the day-to-day.
And his time in prison was just shocking.
Yeah.
I just never saw that coming. And that he'd lose his life and all of that. That was,
What impressed me too is that he and the Christians of the underground church, they loved the Lord Jesus so much that they were willing to say yes, no matter what the cost. You know, they were willing to go where he was calling them to go. And it really spoke to me. Any other comments?
Given your Japanese background,
Yeah.
did that make the adoption more difficult or easier?
Well, I was wondering if it would come against me.
Yeah.
The Japanese and the Chinese kind of exactly friends. But it didn't seem to make a difference.
Oh, interesting.
It did?
Not apparently, no.
Yeah, I don't think it did.
Interesting.
They just wanted their little girls out and to get the money, you know, so it, I don't think they were real particular.
Yeah, as one good thing about China is it did seem like they were pretty genuine in wanting to take care of these girls and get them in a better place. I mean, they seem to be supportive of America's coming, at that time, of America's coming and adopting these children, and the people at the orphanage, I think they didn't have much resources, but they did seem to be caring, loving people that were trying to do a good thing.
You perhaps did say, but is China adopting all just girls instead of boys?
When we were adopting, it was all girls. I think there were 2 little boys in the orphanage, and I think they might have had some kind of issue. But it was all girls because the girls are the ones that are abandoned. Today, I don't know. Do you know?
They backed off a lot of foreign adoptions, partly because they realized that they have a big shortage of young people. And so China, in recent years, like just in the last couple of years, is now pushing for people to have more children. And they're supporting fertility clinics and trying to encourage families. But back then, more than 90% of the children in the orphanages were girls.
I can throw in one little thing on that. Jim has a cousin who would have adopted before you adopted. And back when only one child was alive, evidently if the second child was a boy, a lot of times they were able to adopt 2 boys from a child. But I think it was during the one child only. And so even if the second one was a boy, they were, at that point at least, in that part of the country, getting rid of the boys too, so.
Mine's a history question. I love history. Bush the Elder, who had been ambassador to China and is known for that, bringing the alliance with America. I'm probably one of the few people who attended the opera called Nixon in China. But do you think his promotion of the China-America Alliance help with your adoption process? It certainly helped probably with the awareness. Do you have a comment on that?
Just not with any more knowledge than probably anybody else has, but it seems like, yes, it was probably a good thing. When we adopted, the relations between the two countries were
Was very good at that.
pretty good, yes. Now, I don't think relations are nearly as good as they were back in 1999. But yes, I think that probably did help.
Thank you.
Well, how did your daughter feel about going back to visit China?
She was looking forward to it, partly because of the sunshine camp that she was gonna help work at. But, she was a little, nervous about it too. And when we went, it was actually amazing how God kind of opened doors for us. But we got to go to her old orphanage and have lunch with some of the people who worked at the orphanage. And we got to meet one of her old nannies who's been there for 20-some years and remembered Marley. And she said, I took her, we had an interpreter, but I took her out onto the porch every day to get some sunshine. And Marley just started weeping because, you know, she didn't have any other connection of people that she knew there, but this one nanny remembered her. So it was very meaningful to her.
And it was interesting because, being Scott, the first thing I thought was, yeah, they probably say that to everybody who comes over. Oh, we remember. But we had an opportunity to actually go to the file room, the old files, and they had a file from 20 years ago. And looking through the paperwork, at least for the interpreter, she said, well, yeah, this particular health form is signed by that woman who's a nurse. And she said, she actually signed this form. And so it was highly probable that she did take care of her at one point. And so, yeah, that was meaningful to her. She actually, when she came back, she was, I think that was her first year in college. Yeah, so anyway, she signed up and she took 3 years worth of time to come out and was going to, she's really intent on going back to China. I think life has caught up to her in other ways now. She's married and got a job. I'm not sure she's as interested in going back to China, but she really was planning on going back in a significant way. So it was a good experience.
Thank you.
It's strange that I loved your video there, except being a Catholic, I hated seeing that Pope Francis maybe didn't do enough, but I just was Googling here. It says Pope Francis has made significant overtures toward China, including a 2018 agreement on appointing Catholic bishops and a renewed agreement in 2024 aiming to bridge longstanding differences over control of the church in China, despite some disagreements and criticism. So maybe there's an update that I think Pope Francis is great. That didn't seem to be.
Yeah, it did. And to be honest, I was reading about that they're on better communication levels, and China is allowing him to have more input than a few years ago. It sounds like it's still not like it used to be where you could just appoint cardinals and bishops, but it does seem to be progress.
Glad to hear it.
Thank you.
Don't forget. Thank you very much, Taylors. It was wonderful. And you brought so much added information that it was just that much more. But it was a good book too. So thank you so much for both of you doing this year. And we hope to see you again another time, perhaps. Yeah, yeah. Well, I hope everyone has a wonderful Easter. Don't forget all the events going on during Holy Week next week. And in May 13th, will be our last meeting for this season, and it's Replenishing Our Hills by author Brett Evans, and the photographer will be here. So that should be interesting. I hope you all have a chance. If not, you still have another month. The book is in the library, so please take a look. Sit down in the chair and enjoy just looking through. The pictures are beautiful too, so that'll be our last one. I will be asking next month, I'll bring a copy of the WOC last year's booklet for all of you to make sure if there's any changes that need to be made. Not only does Ellen need any communication information, but we want everything right that goes into the booklet in case somebody else is looking and wants to get in touch with you or something. So let's be sure next month if you can remember to check that out, and so I can get that sent in. Okay, thank you very much for